Today, we are talking about the STRATFI TACFI Growth Accelerator, which is a program that's run by Eagle Point Funding and Deep Tech Showcase, which I represent. And to put it in simpler terms and then, layman's terms, we're talking about a match funding opportunity with the United States Air Force. So that's going to be the main focus. And we're going to give it a little bit of background and context. Some people here might have an extensive knowledge of Air Force funding. Some people might not have any knowledge at all. So we're going to cover everything. And at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions of anyone involved and anyone who's here. So let's get started with a little bit of background. So as I said, we're going to be focusing on two companies that I'm representing today called Eagle Point Funding and Deep Tech Showcase. We are part of a group of companies called Deep Tech Crossing. So Deep Tech is obviously a big thing for us. And we can start with a little bit of background on us. Our vision is bringing more deep tech to market by planning a way to market, generating funding, and spurring on collaborations, which will lead to pilot contracts and initial sales. So that's like this one big sentence. In the end, we're a cluster of companies focused on helping deep tech dual use technologies. And we'll get into that a little bit later on, what exactly the types of companies we work with are doing and, what that means, because deep tech means something different to everyone kind of in the space. But our focus is helping them connect the dots and kind of skip over the innovation valley of death and commercialize their products successfully, bringing companies all the way from the concept stage and the lab stage to the actual market end users and customers through the various modes of non-dilutive and dilutive funding mechanisms and, finding customers and really, building out their business model in a successful way. And we just do that with a focus on both deep tech and, as I said, dual use companies. Dual use meaning federal applications, so government-related technologies that are also relevant for the commercial sector. We serve 350 startups. We serve 350 startups annually. Throughout our network, 70 full-time employees in 10 separate entities. And here are just some of the main kind of divisions and companies that are relevant to today's topic. So it kind of splits up in our ecosystem to business development services and funding services. Eagle Point Funding right there on the left, as it says on the screen, grants and contract specialists. Their entire focus and their objective is to help deep tech companies win grants from the federal government through various agencies. This goes for everything that we're going to talk about today, but we have a separate company called FreeMind that deals with healthcare and everything involved in healthcare. So the only industry that we don't cover is actually healthcare because that's already taken care of. But throughout all the DoD, throughout all the different mechanisms, Eagle Point Funding helps companies by researching, analyzing, understanding their products, and then going after as many grants as possible over their period of time where they're working together. And Deep Tech Showcase on the right is a sister company of Eagle Point that supplements all the business development needs that these companies have, whether it's connecting to investors to raise rounds, commercializing their products by connecting to industry partners, or just to get feedback on their actual products and things like that, as well as a large ecosystem that we've created to help the investors and government agency representatives and government and stakeholders in the industry find those companies that they are trying to find with the different emerging technologies and different innovations that they have created. So underneath here, there's a few different divisions of ours. The Deep Tech Strategies on the right is a core component of what we do at Deep Tech Showcase, helping the companies build out a successful business model and actually analyzing. Our kind of thesis is start with the end user and end customer and then reverse engineer your way to market from there. So, kind of the objective there is avoiding any pitfalls by first understanding who actually wants what I'm doing, where the relevant traction points and how do I get there. Showroom is for companies that we work with who are looking to attend different industry conferences and events that are around their industry, but they don't have the bandwidth or the capital to properly go to these conferences and actually walk away with something in hand. So we help with marketing services, we help preparing, getting their word out that they're going to be there, dry runs, preparing them, and overall helping build out a wide campaign to help them actually take advantage of those networking opportunities that are in person. And deep tech marketing is our marketing division focused on marketing, which is not a surprise. So they do everything from straightforward marketing, building a company to be a thought leader in their industry, their internet presence, building out, everything involved to get the word out, as well as straightforward filling calendars for their sales team and up to SDRs on our end that can manage the leads and help them, vet them and bring in, more suitable customers or more suitable partners. So I threw a lot at you. We'll get into things that are more related to our topic, but that's the core part of our business that's relevant for today. So how does federal funding typically work in general, and how does it work with the U.S. Air Force? So as I said, some people here might have a lot of knowledge in this, some people might not. So we'll start with the basics and using the Air Force, since that's what we're talking today, as an example. So a company has, they have a concept, they think it's going to be a good idea. Obviously, non-dilutive funding from the government is a great source of capital to build out their product, because it lets them develop with in-house R&D, do all the R&D they need without getting up any equity at an early stage. So the company says, you know what, I want to go after federal funding, whether it's a loan, whether it's with companies like Eagle Point Funding that help find the grants and write them and build the proper messaging to put that in context. And they apply for funding. AFworks, as it says, company applying for funding through AFworks. AFworks, there's nothing too complicated. It sounds just complicated. It's just a funding mechanism specifically under the Air Force. There's different organizations that do different, through different funding mechanisms. Today, we're talking about the one through the Air Force. So a company applies. Now, there's 3 stages to apply, from the first stage that's focused on, R&D and market validation, to the last stage with it, which is, the objective is contracting with the United States Air Force. So a company applies for phase 1, they show their proof of concept and, write their story, their background, and the technological and commercial aspects of it. And if they're selected for the first phase of funding through AFworks, they get $50,000 to go and, do market validation and further their R&D. Then the Air Force says, if you're successful, come and apply for phase 2 for the larger sums of money that can actually, help them commercialize, right? So phase 2 can be anywhere from $500K to $1.5 million. Obviously, that's much more substantial than $50,000, but it's contingent, and it's a big but, on a MOU from an Air Force stakeholder. What is an MOU? A Memorandum of Understanding. The companies that are relevant for phase 2 need to go and seek out a Air Force stakeholder within the Air Force and get them to sign a commitment letter, or it's basically a letter of intent that if that company commercializes within the Air Force, they will serve as a potential customer for the product. It doesn't, tie that person down financially. They don't need to actually, it's taken very seriously, but it's just a letter of support. And naturally, as you can imagine, the higher the ranking officer is, or the MOU signee, the higher ranking he is, the more serious the committee that is allocating the money will take the submission. So that's a big issue here for a lot of companies, is finding that person, taking the time, networking. You get an MOU, and then by the time you submit, all of a sudden, with the nature of working with a government agency, people retire, people switch bases, people switch, people go up the ranks, or leave the service in general, and it can be very hard to track down the right partner who believes in your product. And then there's phase 3, which is the big bucks. It's no dollar limit. It depends on the budget of the agency and the project you're working on under that team or department. And you become a government vendor. The government becomes your customer for your product, which is an amazing thing, obviously, and can really help build out a company not only on the government side but also commercially. And as you see down here, struggles with commercialization happen exactly there, right? And in the commercial side, or in the private side, we call it the innovation valley of death, or the innovation valley in general, whatever you want to call it. And the struggles here are the same as in the private and commercial side. Companies are looking to expand, build out their product, create a prototype that's working. And there's all these issues with it, because these teams, the nature of these companies are very scientific. They're usually smaller and more technologically oriented. And business development is something that sometimes they don't have the bandwidth for. or not at the extent that they need. So a lot of companies are basically coming through this system of funding through the Air Force and through in general federal funding, and then dropping off at this very, very critical stage to commercialization. And that's not only an issue for the companies who don't actually succeed in becoming in gaining a customer in the Air Force, but that's a problem for the funding mechanism, AFworks, and the Air Force itself, because they're the ones funding this process, and they're the ones fitting the bill at the end of the day. And then they're investing anywhere from 50K to 1.5 million, as you see on these numbers, and companies aren't making it in the end to actually help the Air Force in general beat the competition, and all the different missions that the Air Force has that they want to advance in. So that's the main issue. That's the kind of the problem and the need that is driving this opportunity that we're talking about today. So the Air Force, to take care of this problem, the Air Force launched its match funding program. That's what TACFI STRATFI stands for, or not stands for, that's what it is. And this is the mission statement taken from AFworks' website. The purpose is to catalyze relationships between Air Force and Space Force end users and acquisition professionals, private sector innovators, and investors, bridging the capability gap between current SBI STTR Phase 2 efforts and Phase 3 scaling efforts, facilitating delivery of strategic capabilities for the Department of the Air Force. So we didn't write this. This is from them. So it's coming from the horse's mouth. And it's exactly the issue that I mentioned, not so different from companies' issues commercializing in the private sector. There is a gap between the Air Force wanting these companies to succeed, and on the other hand, not having a vested interest in the company's business development plans and go-to-market plans and scaling efforts. So since there's no one in the Air Force whose job it is to work with these companies on the business development side, the Air Force says, well, why don't we bring in the people who do this best, and the people who can actually drive these founders to seek out business development help and to seek out advisors and things like that, which are the investment side of it, the private sector investors who can create an additional influx of capital, helping the companies bridge that gap, as well as forcing them to have to prepare for those meetings and actually network with investors and take a leap into that area. And that's why the match funding program was launched. So there's two issues here that we talked about. I'll just give it in short how we're involved. There's the MOU process that companies need to get. As I said before, a company needs to get an MOU in order to get a Phase 2. For that, Deep Tech Showcase and Eagle Point Funding, in a joint effort, created a program called the MOU Club. That program, we're not going to get into it today, but it's specifically for AFworks Phase 1 winners seeking MOUs to move to Phase 2. That's like one stage prior to this one that we're talking about. And then there's the Stratify TACFI Growth Accelerator, which is what we're talking about today, where Deep Tech Showcase helps pair eligible companies, U.S. investors, and U.S. Air Force stakeholders, and Eagle Point Funding helps build winning proposals as grant specialists. I will say, just a quick note, neither of our organizations are related to the Air Force. We work very closely. We have over 100 Air Force personnel who are part of our network and join our programs, but we are privately held companies, and we are not part of the U.S. government in any way. Just a disclaimer. So the Stratify TACFI program from AFworks. I know it seems like Stratify TACFI couldn't sound more complicated, but it's very, very simple if we just break it down. In simple terms, TACFI, as you see at the bottom, stands for Tactical Funding Increase. STRATFI is Strategic Funding Increase. Two of these are just two different tracks as part of this Air Force matching program. TACFI is the tactical side, meaning short-term. STRATFI is long-term. And as you see, the dollar amounts differ depending on how strategic it is, which is long-term, so it's bigger money. And then tactical is the smaller money, which is more short-term projects. Already, I will say that the tactical funding increase for any investors who are interested in joining this opportunity, the tactical funding increase is more of a likely fit, although STRATFI is also an amazing opportunity for larger amounts. So just like it says here, the STRATFI and TACFI are programs where the Air Force co-invests with private sector between 750 to 60 million, if we're counting the the match funds for the Air Force. The Air Force has already invested 750K, as I said before, in these eligible companies. And these are the funding programs to help create an influx of capital for the companies that are on their way to work and contract with the Air Force. So how does this process look like now that we have the STRATFI and TACFI match funding program, and we'll talk about the details and what the dollar amounts exactly are and how we get involved after. The phase one is still the same, 50K for market validation. Phase two, prototype stage, same, 500K to 1.5 million for the company. Great, they have an MOU, amazing. If they've gone through phase two and they've gone through this kind of long vetting process and gained all these different traction points with the Air Force, then they are eligible for a STRATFI TACFI award, which is up to around it says 15 million here, but really with the match funds it could be up to 60 million depending on the program. And the idea here is proven market readiness, right? Because we're bringing in private sector investors who can actually vet these companies as well and push the companies to create a decent evaluation and everything involved in preparing their business model. So that comes in between the phase two and the phase three. It doesn't switch out the phase three, but what it basically does is guarantee that a contract is waiting for them at the end, because the Air Force, by awarding a company a STRATFI or TACFI award, they're basically saying, we want you, and here's the money. We're putting our money where our mouth is, and here it is to develop your products for us. So it's, in the end of the day, there's an Air Force customer who's waiting for these companies at the end, and there's no dollar limit to the contract that's waiting for these companies. So this is a few details. Just a little background, the company, the STRATFI TACFI program has been around since 2020. This is the third cycle of it. It's been an annual process. 2020 and 2021 were technically demos or pilot programs. And this year is the first year that it was released as an official package, an official program, meaning A, that the dollar amounts were increased, which is great, and two, that it's here to stay. So overall, just from 2021, 162 capability packages were submitted all in all, meaning 162 companies were able to come forward with a package of an investor giving a commitment and the Air Force coming in and being able to match those funds. Then there were packages that were supported but not awarded yet. There's many small letters and things that sometimes take time. So there's still things that are waiting for an answer. Overall, there was 275 million in SBR funds allocated, 309 million in matching government funds, and 272 million in matching private funds. So how does it actually work? And now we're getting into the thick of it. So definitely make a note if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer right after. So let's start with TACFI. We'll split it into two, make it super simple. So TACFI, as we said, TACFI stands for tactical, shorter term programs, shorter term projects with the Air Force. On the company side, super simple, one for one. Every dollar from the private sector is a dollar equivalent from AFworks as part of the match funding program if a company selected for it. The funding range, and this basically is, the Air Force's limit. They say, an investor can invest whatever he wants, but we're willing to match 375K to 1.8 million. So that's the equivalent of 375K to 1.8 million from the investor side as well. And then for the company, what that means in total is anywhere between 750K to 3.6 million in funding, being the minimum and maximum in that range. STRATFI gets a little bit more complicated. We won't dive too deep into it. But as we said, it's strategic, so it's a long-term program and it has a little bit more moving parts. This is a 1 for 2. So for every dollar from AFworks, AFworks will give a dollar to any company that can bring $2 from a private sector investor and $1 from an Air Force customer, meaning an Air Force stakeholder with a budget in his department that isn't part of the funding agency AFworks, just an actual stakeholder within the Air Force who wants to give part of his budget to a company, which he can do to help their development because he wants the technology. So as you can tell, it's a little bit trickier for the company. They have to also seek $2 from the private sector and then also go after $1 for the Air Force customer. And then AFworks will basically join in for a quarter of that deal as well. The funding range here is much higher because there's more people involved. And AFworks see it as much more strategic because there's more government agency representatives involved. So it's 3 million to 15 million from AFworks, Same goes for the Air Force customer, 3 million to 15 million. And then from the investors, because it's because it's the two parts, so it's 6 million to 30 million from the investors. So for a company, much larger influx of capital, 12 million to 60 million. What types of industries, right? So going back, we work with all these different industries. Something important to understand for anyone without any background in Air Force or government, the Air Force, and this is just a fun statistic, but the Air Force, if I'm not mistaken, if they were a country, they would have the 20th largest budget out of all the countries in the world. They're one of the biggest organizations. They have huge organizational problems, just like any other huge organization or corporation on the private or commercial side. Even, there's just as much money going towards missiles and planes and things like that as to these industries: AI, data, Industry 4.0 and robotics, AR, VR. Obviously, aerospace and defense is a big thing, and mobility. But there's many, many, many more. The Air Force spends a lot of money developing internally, developing companies. So it's important to understand that virtually any industry that you're interested in will be relevant. Healthcare could be less just because we're not as involved, so it doesn't really come through our ecosystem. And it's obviously a smaller sector in the Air Force, but it's important to understand that it's a big organization with organizational problems that they're looking to solve, everything from software to hardware. So just to get a feel, we're not going to go into the details, but AFworks review process. So this is the additional review process for companies. They've gotten phase 1, they've gotten to phase 2, then they apply for STRATFI, TACFI in this case. There's an initial review. The Air Force does a functional and strategic review. Then there's a board review and SBA review, if applicable, to determine if they will grant a waiver to the funding threshold. It's, all these different terms that we're not going to get into. And then stakeholder execution, and then an award. So there's a very rigorous vetting process to these companies, meaning when they do get selected, you're really talking about the top innovative technologies that are coming through this program. And this is just the one of the ways that the Air Force is vetting them. Here's some of the evaluations for the 2020 program. Based on the program, the STRATFI funding program that happened, the first round. And this was released also by the Air Force, just to show how unique of this opportunity is and how what the numbers look like. Mapware is an example of a company that was pre-STRATFI with 4 million evaluated, and then the evaluation after the program was 40.4 million. An even bigger example is Anduril Industries, which are big. They were 1.9 billion, and they became a company worth 4.6 in evaluation. So these are just numbers. They're very interesting. This was one of the ways that the Air Force, got this program kicked off. And this was just the first round, where now it's a much more established program with, you can see the STRATFI TACFI website on AFworks, and you can virtually get all the information you need, going even deeper than this. So what's in it for me? And this is as in investors. So first of all, invest knowing your dollars will be matched. So that's always a big thing, right? So you're investing in companies that are at the edge of commercialization. They're just about there. They've gone through the funding mechanisms. They've been vetted, and now you're able to influx a certain an X amount of capital and have the Air Force match it. So for the company, that's a really big thing, especially also for investors, since the company will likely succeed more. Low competition on investment. The government's not taking any percentages in equity or anything, out of the investors' grip. So there's no competition on that side for the investors. Invest in pre-vetted technologies. We discussed already. I won't get into that again. And invest in technology with multiple markets, obviously, because they're also relevant for the commercial sector and also for the government sector. No payment until award. We'll get into the details of that, but basically until a company is actually awarded, meaning selected and approved for the program, the investor doesn't need to move any funds. He just needs to commit by the deadline. And obviously there's a tier 1 customer on standby, right? These companies are one step away from having the Air Force as a customer of theirs. and that customer is not going anywhere anytime soon. What can be counted towards private matching funds? So what funds are accepted and what funds are not? Funds that are accepted are equity agreements, IP rights, joint ventures, and pre-sales. Funds that are not accepted, family and friends rounds, loans, no recent spinoffs. I believe the deadline is 1 year. So a company that creates a subsidiary company or a sister company more than a year, less than a year prior to this program, they can't use funds from that, or capital or revenue from that spinoff for this effort to fund themselves and give themselves the commitment. And I will say that even though there's a limit of that year, it is highly frowned upon, I'll put it that way, even if it is, and the likelihood of getting this award through various avenues that aren't the classic investor approach it's very rare. And bootstrapping as well, can't use your own capital. Convertible notes are just an example of things that are frowned upon by the Air Force that that aren't classic. They will be accepted and this is the quote, at the contracting officer's discretion. So that already tells you kind of how they see it. And if they do it, then the loan must have an automatic conversion clause within 5 years of loan receipt. When do we need to pay? When do investors actually need to move the money? So for TACFI, the private funding letter, which is a letter of commitment, it's a template that's filled out. The AFworks has their own template that they have the investors use. So that's very streamlined. The private funding letter and the private investment funds must be received by the company prior to the TACFI award. They are selected before they are awarded. And there's typically anywhere around 60 days until the award actually comes through. These things are not 100% clear ever in every government agency. There's always a give or take with the final dates of things, just being a very large government agency. To qualify, you only need the private funding letter. So that's a big thing for investors just to understand, because you don't actually need to give the investment. You can give a commitment, and if the company isn't selected in the end, then no harm, no foul. STRATFI, which is a strategic one, is a little different because it's much larger sums of money. The private funding letter is needed prior to the award, similar to TACFI, but the funds can be received and count as matching funds during the entire STRATFI effort, meaning the length of the project that the company is going through after they're already selected. So it can be split quarterly, it can be, it can count as match funds even if it's spread out over the length of the project, but it has to come into that, if the project is 1 year, it has to be in that year of the project. Just the notes in green here are just like interesting, kind of facts. The most probable investment agreements for TACFI so far in these past two programs have been safe agreements and quick equity rounds. And for STRATFI, it's also just usual equity rounds. So just those have been the most successful so far percentage-wise, and that's just a little added note from our side in our analysis. What's the catch, right? There's always a catch. So the deadline for commitment is June 30th, not the payday, right? So as I said, the deadline for the funding letter and for investors to give commitments is June 30th. The companies need to apply to the funding, this effort by June 30th. Why is it so soon? Why am I bothering people about this so late? This program was announced around a month ago. No prior, it has been for the last few years, so you can expect it. But now since it's been now it's released as an official program, so it's going to be reoccurring. But up until now, we didn't know exactly when things are going to go down. And this is kind of the Air Force's way of limiting the amount of packages that are submitted, because there's many companies that would like to get into this program, and the Air Force doesn't have the bandwidth to deal with all the proposals and all the packages that are submitted. So what they do is they crunch it into a very small deadline. So on one hand, yes, it's tight, but on the other hand, that's why we're here, to streamline things and help make things more clear and probable. And even if this year doesn't turn out for a company or for an investor, this is something that preparation for should start well a year ahead of time. So even if it's for next year, this is a very relevant thing to learn about. Short sidebar: consider AFworks for your portfolio if you're a founder as well. But if you're an investor and you have a portfolio company that's doing innovative deep tech and they're looking for federal funding, AFworks is an amazing way to go. It's for dual use companies. You can skip TACFI, STRATFI or not. You can go, through the regular avenues of funding without this program as well. Sometimes there are ways to go directly from phase 2 to phase 2. This is a mistake on the slide. There's no direct to phase 3 is a little trickier, but sometimes there's direct to phase 2 applications. Just now, Space Force, which is under the Air Force, announced that they have a direct to phase 2 opportunity for companies who want to skip right to that stage. And excellent traction and stamp of approval for any company developing their new technology to get the Air Force backing it. Is always a great thing. People can apply regularly, or they can speak to Eagle Point Funding, which this is their bread and butter, and they're the professionals in this market. And they're happy to connect with anyone. I'm happy to connect anyone who wants to speak with them about it. So the Stratify TACFI Growth Accelerator. What are we doing to help streamline this process and get the event and get this program working? So being that we have an ecosystem and we have a company that does grants, and we're connected to the founders who are relevant for this opportunity, we found ourselves in the perfect position to help bring things forward. An important thing to understand is that this is a relatively new program. Many people in the Air Force don't even know about it. Investors obviously aren't very educated about it unless they're already involved in the Air Force or in the government agency funding process. And even founders, I specifically have spoken to many phase 2 awarded companies who weren't aware of this opportunity, which is crazy, but it makes sense because it's new, and they don't do very extensive marketing on it. They're starting to, so maybe next year, there'll be a little bit more of a buzz. So what does our growth accelerator look like? April is because it's actually already started, but it's not too late to join as a company. Investors, there's still time until the investor side is joining this program. It's a 3-month program since April from April 4th up until the submission date. It's virtually an accelerator program only for companies who are relevant for this opportunity, to help guide and assist them in getting the right funding and finding the private sector investment to apply for the program. So there's assistance with government and private investor buy-in, assistance with the submission paperwork, pitch events to give the companies exposure to new stakeholders, one-on-one mentoring to help the companies with fundraising preparations, and it's a non-dilutive program. We take an upfront fee from companies that are part of it if they're not already clients of ours and they only want to join for this effort, and only a success fee from the government side. So we're not taking any percentages off the top for investment or anything like that. Eagle Point Funding take percentage for success won through them on the grant side, and that's very typical for anybody that works with them, but nothing off the investment side. So the elements are cohort sessions, there's a showcase, submission building, and one-on-one sessions, with all the above. The TACFI STRATFI showcase, for any investors who are listening in, this is kind of the moment where you guys are involved or begin to be involved in the program. May 12th, a pitch event for investors and U.S. Air Force members to listen to eligible companies for the STRATFI TACFI program. So it's going to be only around 4 to 6 companies that are part of this program who are eligible, from satellites to SaaS to various different technologies, quantum computing, and a bunch of others that those are just off the top of my head. And they're going to pitch, and investors who are interested in this opportunity are welcome to listen, ask questions, and get involved along with the Air Force stakeholders who are going to be there. So it's kind of be this convergence of all the different elements of this specific opportunity. How can I get involved? So first thing is, let us know you're interested. The first step was coming to this, awesome, but let us know. We won't bite. We have many different things to offer, many different industries and many different decision makers and investors and all these different things that are even outside this program. So let us know if you are interested in this program. Ask to review the companies, and most importantly, join the showcase on May 12th. Let us know that you want to join the May 12th event, and join our ecosystem in general if deep tech is an interest of yours. If you're an investor, a corporation, whatever it is, if you're seeking emerging technologies, or if you are a founder and you're interested in taking part in programs like these, let us know. And I'm the director of events, so I manage special programs and our showcase events that we host every month. but I'm more than happy to connect you with the right people at Eagle Point for the grant side or the business development side at Deep Tech Showcase. And stay tuned because there's going to be, much more to hear about in our network. So contact us. You can contact me directly. Everyone here should have my email because I've bothered all of you multiple times. So that shouldn't be an issue. But Asher Dempsey is our Director of Operations and Network, one of the people heading this project. You're welcome to write him or me at Yuval at Deep Tech Showcase. Yeah, so happy to answer any questions. Feel free to send them in the chat and I will answer live. And if you'd like to unmute and ask, that's also fine. So I'll stay on for the remainder of this session. And thank you everyone for coming. Serge, I think you're muted. I don't know if you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Very useful. I've been aware of this initiative. I don't know if the Air Force Ventures is anything that related to this initiative, or it's part of it, or it's just something else.
So Air Force Ventures is under AFworks. So okay, they're different, but they're virtually the same. Because Air Force, if you notice the slide that has the review process, part of that review process is the first one even is Air Force Ventures. They're the ones who are handling the actual process with the funds and things like that. But it's all considered under the AFworks umbrella as the overall Air Force funding mechanism.
Got it. And the other question: are there any limitations? I would assume there is for U.S. citizenship or nationals. Or green card residents are eligible? I mean, I would assume it's an important question because some of the projects we're doing involve residents, but not citizens per se.
Yeah, so overall, different opportunities have different requirements. And I'm talking generally, forget Air Force, like generally federal funding in the United States, typically the company needs to be be majority owned in the United States and be majority owned by a U.S. citizen or green card holder. Although there's different opportunities, it changes sometimes, and there's specific opportunities for people who are not citizens. There's all these different things. Eagle Point Funding know way more about it than I do, for specifically on those, because they're the ones who kind of stay up to date and research and do all the analysis. I'm more than happy to connect you to have a call with one of them and learn about what the status is and whether the Air Force has the same requirements. Overall, that's like the general rule, but it varies and things change with time. So it's something worth checking out as a founder, I think.
Got it. And one last question, so I won't take other people's time or slots. IoT, there are two projects. One is a ground effect vessel that we are ready to present to investors. Wix or GEV. I don't know if you know what that is. The other is acoustic IoT, which is basically a service company focusing on sensors, acoustic sensors. So is IoT something within the range that these guys are looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as I said, it's harder to find something that the Air Force isn't looking for. Than something that they are looking, than to minimize what they are looking for. It's an example is the Office of OSHA is under the Air Force Office of Commercial Economic Analysis. They have team members in energy, blockchain, computing, AI, everything you can imagine that they're looking for their organizational issues. So I'm happy to talk. Serge, if you send me an email back, I'm happy to connect you with Eagle Point Funding, and they can tell you exactly what the opportunities are for AFworks in the next coming months and what should be coming up next, and every single opportunity they're more than happy to discuss and learn more about what you're doing. I'll move on just to the next company. For May 12th, do you still have availability for companies to present? Yes, we have availability, George. However, as I said, it's a paid program. Happy to connect you to the people who are running it, and they can discuss the terms. I know that things are a little bit more flexible for companies who are joining later in the process, because obviously they'll be taking less of the value in the cohort. So I think it's definitely worth having a conversation. And if you send me a note on that, I'm more than happy to connect you to Josh, our founder, who's leading it.
Yeah, I've talked with you guys,
Oh.
and by the way, very impressed with what you guys are doing. So,
Thank you.
you know, yeah, I was just curious if, yeah, it was more of just a question about, is there still availability? I have talked to some of
Absolutely.
your folks, and I am aware that it's a paid program. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't have our own limit. The more companies we work with, the more success we hope to find. So we fully want to have, as many as possible. That being said, with the short deadline for this
Yeah.
awesome opportunity, we had to start, right away. So things
Understood.
started, but most of the program is one-on-one sessions, not because of the nature of it. So even companies joining late can take advantage of almost everything that's part of the agenda. That being said, more than happy to loop Josh in and to have another conversation and see where things are at now and how we can maybe move forward.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for coming. Anybody else have any questions? I'm more than happy to answer. George, where are you based?
I'm in Boston.
Awesome. Awesome. Great weather. I'm enjoying every minute.
Yeah. And that's right. There's an in-person event today in Boston, right?
Yeah.
So,
In person, it doesn't exist anymore, I think.
well, it's hopefully things are opening up, but I'm hoping to
It's a
meet
good
with.
thing. It's a good thing. It makes it. We've run a bunch of these. I was able to do one in New York and have people virtual and in person. We were able to do some from Israel and have people
Right.
from here. It's amazing. It's a great thing.
I'm hoping to meet with one of your teammates next week.
Oh, awesome. Matt.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
Amazing. Amazing. Awesome. So thank you, everyone. If there's no other questions, if there
Yeah,
are,
I have one quick
go for
question to Sergio again. Is the video will be available, the Zoom recording
yes,
for
yes,
access?
it will, and I will be sending the presentation to everyone. So you can
Great.
expect both of those things. Anyone who has any further questions, send me an email. Don't be a stranger. Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
and it
Yuval.
was nice meeting you all. Absolutely.
Yes,
Nice meeting
thank
you,
you very
George
much.
and Serge. We'll
Thank
Good
talk.
luck to everybody.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.